For Polity in Johannesburg, I'm Darlene Creamer. Author David Africa joins me to discuss his insightful book, Lives on the Line. You became active in the African National Congress's liberation movement while still in high school. Could you start by telling us about your background and how you first became involved in the struggle against apartheid?
I hail from the township of Manenberg on the Cape Flats. And so when I went to high school in 1984, my father was active in community politics, civic politics, so there was always awareness. And then when I came to high school, it was just before the national uprising in 1985. And then everyone became politically involved. Obviously some of us then sustained that involvement, which was the case with me. So first in student politics, as a representative on the Student Representative Council, and then provincially in the Western Cape Students' Congress, and obviously in the community Manenberg itself. And then as one became more involved, you came to the attention of people in the ANC underground, and I was then recruited into the underground whilst I was still at high school, yes.
After South Africa's democratic transition, you and 20 fellow ANC intelligence officers in the Western Cape joined the South African Police Service's Crime Intelligence Division. Ironically, the same unit, under its former identity as the Security Branch, had once targeted you and your comrades. How did you navigate working alongside people who had previously hunted, arrested, tortured, and even killed your friends? And could you share the story of inviting one of those former enemies, now a colleague, into your home to celebrate Eid al-Fitr?
Yes, so we had the advantage, I would say, over the security branch officers, we from the ANC, in that we were obviously politically prepared for this integration. So we understood that it's a necessity. There was a negotiated political solution. And so we would have to work with people who were in government at the time. And I mean, there was a political maturity amongst us where we accepted this. Now, obviously, once you meet the people themselves, it's not that easy necessarily, because some of them are quite difficult. I mean, some of them are unreconstructed racists. Others are struggling to make a transition to working in the new South Africa. And then obviously there were the black security branch officials, generally at the lower levels in the ranks of the branch, now in crime intelligence. And they were the curious ones, because they were obviously people who lived with us and who were working for the enemy, as it were. But because we were politically prepared and politically mature, we saw it as a responsibility to do this work and to work with these people. And for the larger part, we got along quite well, actually, on both sides of the equation. Obviously, there were some individuals whose names crop up regularly who are attempting to sabotage, mostly because they could not reconcile themselves to working with these ANC, what they used to call terrorists. So there are some of those, but generally, to my great surprise at least, we worked together very well. Some of us became very close because, given the nature of the work, you have to trust the person next to you. Otherwise, you can't do the work. It's impossible. So one of these was a black, in South Africa, we would say a colored security branch policeman who was very active, one of the leading characters in the branch targeting the student movement, and who had come to my house to arrest me on occasion. He never got me, but he did come and try. So we end up working very closely together. And because you are busy, you are working 18, 20 hours a day, you are eating wherever you can. It's on the road, or it's quickly in the office, or if we're close to my place or his place, we would pop in and have something to eat. So this is Eid, and I'm married into a Muslim family. So obviously we celebrate Eid, but I'm working. And we are close to my house and it's lunchtime. So I say to him, let's go to the house, which is usual. He would drop me there and I would eat something, and he had never gone into the house. Part of the reason he'd never gone into the house is because he was involved in the arrest of my sister-in-law, who was charged with terrorism in the 1980s and had attempted to arrest my other sister-in-law, who was also involved in student politics, and my wife at the time. They were a very political family. So now he drops me. So I say to him, come in, let's eat. Come and join the lunch. And he's terrified because, I mean, he's a hardcore security policeman who had definitely, at least physically, assaulted detainees. I mean, he's that type of person. But we are working together. So I say to him, come in. And he says, no, I'm not going. And I insist. Now, I'm also his senior at this point. So more or less, he has to do it. All right. And he then goes in with me. And he obviously expects a certain reception there. But he comes in and everyone is eating. I mean, it's obviously the food is delicious. And I say to my wife, look who's here. And she says, have a seat. Do you want something to eat? And he's completely shocked by the response, but he's just received like any other person would be received. And I think it was a poignant moment in the sense of, you know, you're working together and so on, but you realize the humanity of the people that you were targeting all these years. I mean, these are ordinary, decent people, and you were actually hunting these people when some of them were just children also. So that was a very interesting experience. And there are a number of incidents where food also brought us together, whether it's the first braai when we had the integration or this event or just exposing people, I mean, white Afrikaners, for example, to eating a roti and curry. And the fact that you don't put rice into the roti and then the curry. I mean, I eat it with rice or the roti. So those were things that also breached this kind of divide that you were asking about. How do you work together with these people? You work together because you realize they are people like we are people, and we are professionals, so we work together.
Your book opens in 1996 with a dramatic scene. Several thousand members of Pagad, People Against Gangs and Drugs, gathered outside the home of Cape Town gangster Rashid Stahi. You were undercover in the crowd that day as an intelligence officer. Can you take us back to what happened?
So the story starts the Friday before the march, and the march is on a Sunday evening. And generally speaking, there would be two marches, usually on a Thursday and a Sunday. This is a Sunday march. On the Friday, having received a number of reports from sources, and also just, being from Cape Town and knowing who the Stachis are, I write a report, a warning alert to say that we expect violence and that there should be sufficient police presence there because of who they're marching to, but also sources saying we are planning to do something. When the march commences, in fact, it's not the march, it's first a cavalcade because there's a distance between the mosque. It's 15 minutes by car to the house, right? So when the cavalcade starts moving, there's one police van, and there are about 2,000 people, at least. Many, if not most of them, armed. The intelligence alert has been ignored. Why, I don't know, and there are many theories, some of them conspiratorial, about why this happened. Anyway, we then drive, obviously. I'm in the crowd. I'm with this colleague, the former security branch colleague. We get out of the cars, we meaning the entire crowd, and we start walking, 100, 150 meters to the house. And then, stand in front of the crowd, and obviously they're shouting and sloganeering and so on. And then suddenly there is shooting, which just, it goes on forever. Obviously, in the moment, it always feels forever. But definitely hundreds of rounds are fired, and obviously we take cover, but a number of people are wounded in this situation because the shooting is quite random. Most of the people who are injured are actually from the crowd, the Pagad crowd themselves. I then leave together with my colleague because we want to now communicate to my boss to say, there's no police presence. This has just happened. Please communicate with whoever in the police, in the hierarchy, to send more police. So we go to Mowbray police station, which is about 5 minutes away, to communicate because as it happens, my cell phone has died. In those days, the batteries didn't last so long. When we return to the scene with my boss now, Stachi had arrived at the scene and had been murdered. There was some police presence, a bit more at the time, but for some reason, again, it gives credence to the sort of conspiracy theories. The police allow him through a roadblock, basically into the crowd, where he is obviously, people identify him, corner him, shoot him, and set him alight. And this is the scene that plays out. I mean, it's obviously a very dramatic scene, and it has a very dramatic effect then, in the sense of the government then realizes that this thing is actually more serious than we imagined. So that is what happens there. And I mean, that also provided a major boost to Pagad, in that they had taken a very prized scalp, in a sense, that the Staggies were the most well-known gangsters on the Cape Flats. It provided them a lot of credibility in that sense.
The 6 years that followed the lynching of Rashad Staggie were both traumatic and intense. How did a community group like Pagad, which began with concerns about crime, shift from vigilantism into what ultimately became acts of terrorism?
So my hypothesis, which I think is borne out by the evidence, is that when Pagad was conceptualized, it was conceptualized as a political movement that had the option of turning to terrorism, as it did in the end. In other words, the common misperception that Pagad was a community group and a vigilante group which then turned violent in the end, I believe is mistaken. Partially, obviously, because of access I had to intelligence around the initial meetings where Pagad was discussed. Obviously, at the start, it's not even using any violence. It's simply marching, it's hosting meetings, it's gaining popularity, it's developing its reputation as an anti-gangsterism, anti-drug movement. At some point, it then starts using, let's say, vigilantism as a tactic. But this is clearly targeted against drug dealers, gangsters, and so on. So it doesn't cause a problem to its supporters, because everyone on the Cape Flats has had enough of gangsters, has had enough of drug dealers. So in fact, it bolsters its support, like the murder of Staggie, for example. The next meeting after that murder, about 10 days later, instead of 2,000 or 3,000, there are 15,000 people at the Pagad meeting. So the vigilantism bolstered its popularity. From the word go, there was, for example, the accumulation of arms, the building of pipe bombs, the acquisition of hand grenades, and there was, parallel to this popular mobilization, an ideological training program to get people to shift from anti-gangsterism to anti-state. So it wasn't a thing that came later on. Obviously, at some point, the terrorism, let's say the violence targeting the state or civilians with a clear political intent, becomes obvious. They are bombing the officers of the Pagad task team. They are killing police officers, magistrates. They attempt to kill intelligence people, myself, Anwar Dramat, and so on. So the terrorism became obvious at some point, but it was always part of the strategy to build an anti-state movement. It wasn't like at some point they said, okay, let's turn this thing anti-state. It was always part of the strategy to turn to terror and to turn to a very clear political program targeting the state.
In 1998, advocate Willie Viljoen insisted you testify at an inquest into the death of Rashad Staggie. Can you describe what happened the day after you testified and the fatwa issued by Qibla and Pagad's paramilitary unit, the G-Force, calling for your assassination?
There's obviously the Staggie incident, the murder, and then necessarily there will be an inquest at some point because it's not a natural death. As intelligence people, we obviously do not want to or expect to be called to this inquest because we try to do our work discreetly. For some reason, both the investigators in the police and in this case the advocate heading the inquest is insistent that myself and my one colleague should testify at the inquest because we were present. It serves no material value because we were there like many other people were there. And we are not going to talk about sources and so on. What happens obviously is that we are now exposed because it's a public inquest. I mean, there are people sitting in the court, Pagad G-Force members and so on. So quite clearly here is a person who is identified as an intelligence officer. And they can see you, they can identify you. Some of them would know me, I mean, from previous political history and so on. So they now know that this person called David Africa is an intelligence officer conducting operations against Pagad. At some point thereafter, not immediately, a fatwa is issued. A fatwa being a religious instruction by the leadership of Qibla, who directs Pagad politically and to a certain extent operationally. Because myself and Anwar Dramat have come to the attention of Pagad as people who are running operations against them, Pagad people decide that they want to kill us. But now, because of who we are, meaning the political history, more than the current professional situation, or let's say affiliation as intelligence officers, this decision has to be taken at a higher level, and it is taken to the leadership of Qibla. And they then say to the Pagad people, go ahead, you can kill these people. So their blood is permissible. And then obviously, this decision is operationalized. People are then instructed, you, and you have to kill these people. So we find out that there is a fatwa in general that they've decided we must be killed, but obviously you don't necessarily know the details of when and where and how. And this culminates at some point in a very concrete attempt to kill me and my family, in fact, where the Grassy Park cell of the G-Force is instructed to kill me. And the whole thing is accelerated by a failed recruitment in that cell, which we try to do. One of my colleagues tried to recruit someone in that cell, and the recruitment fails. And this guy then goes back to the cell to say, these people have tried to recruit me and so on. And then they say, you now go and kill this David Africa guy. So one night they come to kill me, but thankfully, one of the people in that cell, just before they leave Grassy Park, which is about 7 minutes drive from my house, is an agent for the National Intelligence Agency. And he communicates with his handlers. And he is in fact handled by Arthur Fraser, who is the provincial head at the time of the NIA. And Arthur calls me. First, Arthur instructs his deputy to communicate with my boss, which is the normal protocol. As it happens, that communication never happens because my boss's phone is off. Thankfully, Arthur calls me directly and he says, Pagad is on the way to kill you. And you have about 4 or 5 minutes before they are there because they've left already. And he tells me that one of the people in that cell is one of his people. And he has instructed this guy that if the attack is inevitable, if it's about to commence, this guy must shoot as many of these people as he can, obviously to save my life. But now I know, so I have 4 minutes, to prepare. And I take the necessary preparations, put the family at the back of the house and sort of, try to cover them with mattresses and so on. And I have a police radio with an emergency button on top. But obviously the police in South Africa always takes 2 hours before they arrive. But as a matter of protocol, I press the button just so that I can say I did press the button. And within 2 minutes, the police are there. The police all over the place and lights, and sirens. And obviously I was partially pleased and partially displeased because what we wanted to do was arrest these people. Basically as they were about to commence the attack, but the police tell me that no, we have to have the sirens and the lights. This is part of our rules and regulations. So they then divert the cell, they divert away from the house because they can see there's a police presence. And subsequently, most of them were arrested, obviously, we rolled up the cell and most of them were sent to very lengthy terms of imprisonment and so on. Yeah.
Within crime intelligence, you often struggle to convince your superiors about the seriousness of threats the country faced. You even quoted Winnie the Pooh's advice on patience. If the person you are talking to doesn't appear to be listening, be patient. It may be that he has a small piece of fluff in his ear. What were some of the main frustrations you encountered?
There were 2 frustrations with convincing my superiors that this thing is serious. The first was political in a sense that many people in the senior levels of government, now I'm not even talking about police management, could not conceive of an organization like Qibla, which was part of the liberation struggle alongside us, obviously. I mean, a different ideological track and so on, but we were in the trenches together in some way, that they would now turn against a democratically elected government, which obviously we had all fought for. So that political paradigm shift that was necessary to say that as much as we were together then, these people are now targeting us. That was very difficult and really took about 2 years to make that shift politically at the level of the cabinet and so on. That was the one problem. Now, the only thing you can do is you can obviously explain. I mean, saying that we have intelligence, there was a meeting where they discussed and decided the following. The other thing is that, in a sense, paradoxically, you are hoping that the bad events which you think are inevitable will convince them that this is a serious threat. And the murder of Staghi is that bad event in many ways, where quite clearly now, it's something that you cannot ignore. It's in your face and it's there for everyone to see. So that was the one thing. The other thing was that many of the police and intelligence management in the province, in the Western Cape, former apartheid, the police in general, for some reason thought that because the province at that time was run by a National Party provincial government, that Pagad was an ANC ploy to destabilize the province. And so one had to convince them that, in fact, this is not the case. That as much as Kibla and the ANC was, in a sense, on the same side in the past, that it's not the case now, and that, there's no ANC involvement. So when I, as an ANC person, came to say this is a threat, they didn't regard me as a credible person, necessarily. I mean, some of them, obviously others did. So, it was a struggle having to convince people all the time, because obviously you wanted the resources to prevent the thing from spiraling out of control. But the resources were not committed because both politically and operationally, people were not convinced that this was in fact the case. And so you were not given the resources, meaning that you could not prevent the thing from escalating. And by the time it was obvious to everyone, then there's a certain point where people just want to then throw resources at the problem. But then it doesn't help because it's too late. It's now not really a resource problem. It's a different kind of problem.
You were also working with outdated equipment, which failed you during a critical operation when access was gained to a house where assassinations and bombings were being planned. Could you tell us more about that story?
So, in the 1980s, when we were on the other end of the security branch's operations, one had the impression that these people have magical abilities, technical and otherwise, that they could listen to everything and so on. Obviously, when you arrive there, you see, but these things are very old, 20, 30, 40 years old, the equipment, some even older. Now, in intelligence, what you try to do is you try to integrate human intelligence with technical intelligence. So you use the human sources that you have to gain access to places which are denied to you, where you can't just walk in and sit there and say, please continue with your meeting where you are discussing how to murder people. So you want, obviously, access to a place where you can place listening devices in this instance. And we do, in fact, find this, which is an achievement in itself. The place where most of the killings are discussed and the instructions issued, you must kill this one, you must kill that one, and so on. So we gain access. And in fact, we plant devices in this facility, which is obviously great because now we will have detailed intelligence about who is going to kill whom. And one can then take certain measures to prevent and to arrest people and so on. We obviously don't intend to use this evidence or this intelligence in a court because these are very sensitive methods. But we have gained access to the facility, and this facility is now covered by us technically. Obviously, what you need in this instance, you need the devices in the house, and then you need to be able to hear somewhere else. You must listen to it, right? So there's a transmitter and then obviously a receiver. So we meet the technical people and they say you can listen from about 2 kilometers, if I'm not mistaken. So you can set up a listening station 2 kilometers away. And in fact, you can put a repeater there and repeat this communication to your office. So you can literally sit in the office and listen to this. Office being 10, 15 kilometers away. Excellent. This is excellent. Now we have a breakthrough, right? So Dramat and I get into the car with listening. I mean, sort of, something like this. And we are now listening, right, to bugs that are in the facility, 2 kilometers, but we don't hear anything. Now you drive closer because there are many environmental factors that can affect the quality of what you hear. Closer, 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 closer. And the first time we hear something is right outside the house, meaning from 2 kilometers, which can be transmitted to your office 15 kilometers away. You are now about 20 meters from the target house. Here you can hear. You can hear actually. So you are slightly deflated because obviously, this is not nice. You've put in the effort and so on. Anyway, we are industrious and creative. And in fact, we find a house right next door that we can use as a listening station. But obviously, we can't be in that house because people will see us going in and out, So this house can be used as a relay station to our. So we have the equipment next door, meaning we are now 10 meters away, and we will relay. But then the relay doesn't work. So it's this kind of thing, and there's just nothing that can be done. This is the equipment that we have. Later on, as you will again see from the book, I mean, one of the dramatic scenes, we get the right equipment, in fact, and the results are spectacular. But for most of the 6 years, we were working with very ancient equipment.
By middle of 2000, Cape Town was in a state of panic as pipe bombs detonated almost every week. Please discuss the events that led to your disarming of a bomb at the Keg and Swan pub, and how you were involved with others who once served in the ANC's military underground in ultimately taking down the G-Force.
So, as I said, what we as intelligence people try to do is to use the human sources that we have, people that we have recruited, let's say in this instance inside Pagad, in the G-Force, and we then try to use them to piggyback technology into places and vehicles and so on, where we can then, outside of them, we can find out things, right? In other words, it protects the human sources as well because they are not there physically when people are arrested, for example. So the technology covers the sources. Obviously, it's also more specific. We get access to a car that's used in bombings. So we have the car for about 2 hours or something like this. And we put equipment into the car, tracking, audio, and so on into the car. And usually when you do this kind of thing, you expect to wait very long before it starts producing intelligence, because it's not as if these people sit in the car all the time and plan attacks. You could wait a week, a month, a year before you hear something useful in the car. Now, the car then lands without targets, and they get into the car. We are sitting, and this time the relay works. We are sitting in our office listening, and they get into the car, and after greeting each other, Assalamu alaikum, and so on, the very first thing they talk about is a bombing that's going to take place tomorrow morning, in detail. They say tomorrow we are going to plant a bomb in Durban Road, in Durbanville. Obviously, you are quite shocked in the sense that you can't really believe it, but this is in fact the case, because you re-listen, and that is it. Tomorrow morning, we are going to plant a bomb in Durban Road, in Durbanville. It's an unusually quiet day. It's a Thursday. So staff who's been working, for weeks on end without sleep, have gone home early. So we then call them back to the office to say, listen, something's going to happen tomorrow, and there's now a certain number of things for us to do so that we can successfully intercept these people in possession of a bomb tomorrow morning. And this is done. People are deployed to various places to observe and to do surveillance and so on. I then stay at the office. My boss goes home because everyone's been working non-stop. He wants to sleep a bit. And I say to him, on the way home, can you please pass, because it is literally on your way home, the premises or the facility of the special task force, because we have privileged access to the task force. Tell them to be on standby in Durban Road tomorrow morning from about 5 onwards. So he goes. I stay at the office together with one colleague, and I will be monitoring this car in the sense of listening what's happening in the car and tracking it obviously on a map where it's going. At some point in the morning, it's after 5, the car moves. And obviously people are talking in the car. Quite clearly, they are now on their way to pick up the bomb. So they move, they're on their way, and it's a short distance to the place where they pick up the bomb. I then call my boss to say, boss, they are on their way. Tell the task force they are coming, because the task force obviously is waiting for them in Durban Road. He says, my goodness, I was too tired. I didn't go to the task force last night. And at this point, they have the bomb and they are on their way to Durban Road, which is going to take them that time of the morning, 10 minutes or so. So I say, please contact them, and so that they can, now do it, as in now get there. But in the meantime, can you please go yourself? And I ask him, do you have a gun with you? He says, yes. I say, go. Because in case there's no task force, someone will have to arrest these people. So he then is now in pursuit of them, but he's well behind them. Because as I can see on the map, they have passed his house already. Now things become desperate, and I then call the police 10-111 number, the emergency number for the police. But now I'm calling as a normal civilian, because I don't want to say, I'm an intelligence officer and so on. So I call the number and I say, listen, there are 2 people in the following car, registration, so on and so on. The car is a blue Sapphire. They are on their way to go plant a bomb in Durban Road. So the policeman on the other end of the line says to me, do you know it's an offense to make a false report to the police? I say, yes, I know, but this is real. It's real. And I mean, there's a whole thing that ensues then, where in the end I say to him, listen, I'm a police officer, and this is my force number and so on. Please deploy the police and, alert to which they then do. It's broadcast on the police, the radio network. When my boss gets to Durban Road, these people have moved. They are just moving, in fact. The bomb has been planted quite clearly. They are arrested then, not in possession of a bomb, but having placed a bomb. In the end, charges are withdrawn because quite clearly, there are some discrepancies in what happened and how, and we don't want to expose also the methodology that was used to get them. But obviously the bomb is found, it is deactivated, and it was meant to explode during lunch hour at the pub on a Friday afternoon, where obviously the pub is packed. Many lives are saved because it's planted in a pot plant right where people are sitting. So, I mean, that was in a sense a major achievement in the use of human source and technical intelligence. But again, one was deflated by the fact that the results were suboptimal. Because when you have that level of precision in intelligence, you should be able to use it better, which we could not or did not do in our case.
Finally, David, can you share the key lessons you took away from your experience in the operation to take down Pagad and G-Force?
There are many lessons, but there are 3 I would like to focus on. The one is, when you have these kinds of national security threats, and at the moment, we are dealing with a huge gang problem on the Cape Flats, for example, which is intractable. I mean, it's gone on forever. It seems not to be solvable. Obviously, it's solvable, but the first thing you need a strategy and a comprehensive strategic approach to how are we going to deal with this, and it must be ambitious. When we, for example, dealt with the G-Force, our ambition was to destroy the G-Force, nothing less than that. Because when you are dealing with these kinds of threats, you have to commit resources, energy, and so on, and you must want to achieve decisive outcomes. So we need a decisive strategy for whatever national security threats we are confronted with. That is the first lesson. That requires political leadership, which we had very strong political leadership at the time. Mbeki was the president. He was a very decisive president, and people were held to account. At the moment, we don't have that kind of political leadership in the country. I mean, quite clearly, it's absent. The second thing is that you need a very energetic and committed and creative intelligence leadership. People who can think out of the box and people who are driven to deal with the issue with which they are confronted. In our case, then, Pagad, terrorism, and so on. People like Anwar Dramat, people like Petros, people like Jeremy Veery, people like Arthur Fraser. I mean, we were all, in a sense, fanatical about defeating the G-Force. And we were creative. We spent so much time just thinking, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then we implemented. So it's strategy, it's innovative and driven leadership, and then it is capabilities. So we have now, for example, a huge intelligence apparatus in South Africa. But the intelligence apparatus we have, let's say crime intelligence now, is not a capability. It is just a bureaucracy. It is a thing that exists with so many thousands, 6, 7, 8,000 people, but it cannot do things. What we built at a small scale was an intelligence capability which was a weapon. When you deployed it, you achieved things. And what we need is to shift intelligence from being a bureaucracy to being a weapon. An instrument that you deploy in order to achieve decisive outcomes. And if you take strategy, the big plan, and then you take leadership, innovative leadership, who can build capabilities and weaponize those capabilities, those to me are the key lessons from then, and their relevance now is so significant because the absence of all of these three things is part of the reason why we have so many intractable, seemingly unsolvable national security problems.
That was David Africa discussing his book, Lives on the Line.